A very good afternoon. My name is Vincent Odhiambo and this is Monday Business Center. Now, in the past few months, the high cost of living has taken the country by storm with household goods, including food items like bread, sugar, cooking oil, milk and maize flour going at a very high prices, a situation that has forced a majority of Kenyans to pay more in order to survive. Now, Kenyans have taken to social media to express their struggles under the hashtag lower food prices. But what are the solutions for the current hardship that the country is in, considering the weakening of the Kenyan shillings? Now, we'll be talking to George Munga, an economist and managing partner at AMG Kenya, on this show, and John Makali will be coming on the third part to just take us through the sporting activities that happened over the weekend. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Vincent.
Now, my first question, why are Kenyans struggling?
Kenyans are struggling. I want to give you what we call a consumer price index, and that is the measure of the cost of goods from period to period. And in this instance, I'll give you what we call the CPI index between March 2021 and March this year, those two comparative periods. In March 2021, at the same time last year, our CPI was at 113.81. Come this year, that is March 2022, the CPI index is 119.13. That is a 6 basis point increase, which is one of the highest that we've had for quite some time now. CPI measures the cost of what we call household goods from one period to the next. And in Kenya, what goes into the household basket is what you mentioned, that is bread. We have bread, we have cooking oil, we have maize flour, but there's something else that we've added, that is the cost of energy, which has also gotten quite high. So Kenyans are right that cost of living in the country has risen. Some of it is what we call imported inflation, but some of it is out of our own making. With COVID-19 pandemic having hit the country in 2020, and of course part of 2021, there was a big disruption in what we call supply chain, and that explains to you why cost of cooking oil is one of the items that have gone very high. Cooking oil, the raw materials for making cooking oil is largely imported, and during COVID, some of those supplies were not able to get into the country within the time spans required, and that explains why that cost has gone high and has now spiraled into 2022. The other aspect that government has been trying to sort out is cost of energy in the country. If you look at Kenya vis-a-vis our peers in the region, that is, you look at Egypt, you look at South Africa, you look at Nigeria and the West Africa, our cost of energy is one of the highest in the region. Though our supply is stable, but our costs are still very, very high. That is because of the inbuilt inefficiencies in our distribution channels, all the way from the point of generation to the final meter. That is when you read your meter at your household, and that has contributed very largely to the increase in cost of manufactured good. You call it bread, call it maize flour, because energy is a very huge component in the cost of manufacturing, as cost of manufacturing these goods, and that explains why our CPI has gone up by 6 basis points. And then the last point is inflation. The Kenya shilling has been going down vis-a-vis the hard currencies for the last, I think, 3 or 4 quarters. You remember early last year, or in 2020, Kenya shilling was trading at between 103, 104. The highest it went to, I think, in Q2 of last year was 105. Between last year and to date, it has gone to 113, 114, and in fact there's a time it reached 115, which is one of the highest rates that we've seen the Kenya shilling trading over the last 2 years. And when Kenya shilling depreciates vis-a-vis the dollar, our cost of imports go up. And with that huge variance, our cost of import have gone up by 5, 6, 7% if you look at it vis-a-vis what we were paying last year. And that explains why the CPI index, or what you call the cost of living, has gone up by almost 6 basis points.
Okay. Now you mentioned supply chain having been interrupted, and one thing that COVID taught us is that we are able to survive. Okay, and looking at what the government, the role of the government in this, what can it do to ensure that the citizens are taken care of? We don't suffer to the extent at which currently we are in. So how can the government chip in and ensure that Kenyans get back on their feet?
To be fair to the government, Vincent, I think the Kenyan government really tried its best during the COVID-19 period. And remember, this was a world pandemic. It was not only restricted to Kenya alone. If you look at our currency vis-a-vis our peers, then probably we are doing even much better than our peers. And by that I mean the countries that surround us. You talk of Uganda, you talk of Tanzania, you talk of Rwanda. So I think the government of Kenya did quite some work in trying to manage our economy during that period. But that notwithstanding, there are things that the government ought to have done that maybe they didn't do. The economic planners at Treasury should have known that our currency is likely to weaken vis-a-vis the dollar, and therefore reduce our borrowing so that we don't spend a lot of money in our debt repayment. That would have conserved the little forex reserves that we have at central bank. That would have stabilized the Kenya shilling. But that notwithstanding, I think the government is negotiating with IMF to get some reserves to push into the economy. So I think that is something that government is trying to work around. The other bit that I knew the government should have done and should have addressed very, very strongly is the cost of energy. I think it's something that is within our purview as Kenyans to address, because our cost of energy is they're artificially high, if I may say that, meaning the costs are man-made. If I want to put it that way, if KPLC was designed to reduce the cost of energy to below a shilling per megawatt hour, they would be able to do that, because if you look at the cost that they purchase their power from what we call IPPs, the independent power producers, vis-a-vis what they use, what they spend to purchase from, say, the other producers, there's a very big disparities. Yet you find that they purchase a bulk of their power from the IPPs at that high cost, yes, which is more expensive. So it is something that is man-made, and I think that I would say that there's a cartel that manages that space, and the government can rein on those those cartels, then they're able to reduce our cost of energy. And as I told you, cost of energy is one of the biggest contributors to eventually the cost of manufactured goods. So if we can reduce our cost of energy by even 10%, you'll see a reduction in our CPI indices by 4, 5, 6%. So that is an aspect that government is supposed to, is able to, and they should do that as a priority. The other thing is the way we managed our productive sectors during the pandemic. That one we didn't do very well. Agriculture is our mainstay, but during that time, you remember we had just we were in the process of managing the locust invasion at that time, and before we did, then the COVID came in, and we didn't see interventions into the agricultural space within that period, and that tells you why even cost of agricultural goods have gone high vis-a-vis what we used to pay in 2020 or 2019. Those are areas that I think the government should have done, but they didn't do quite well to foresee what was likely to happen. But that notwithstanding, I think they still have latitude to be able to remedy some of these areas. One of the areas that I think CBK can come in almost immediately reduce our, to stable the Kenya shilling is to inject quite some dollars into the economy. I was in South Sudan, I think early last month, and the South Sudanese pound was trading at around 652 to the dollar. What the government did, of course, with the assistance of IMF, is that they injected a lot of dollars into the economy, and the rate came down, I think, in a period of 2 months to around 430 to the dollar. So that is one of the quick wins that the government can do to stabilize our cost of living, and of course the cost of energy. Those are the low-hanging fruits that they can almost fix immediately, but that is if they want to do that.
Well, we have the option of doing that, but they haven't actually done it.
Correct.
Well, you touched a little bit on agriculture, and last week the prices of wheat went up by 10%. And if you look at the geopolitical issues that is going on in Ukraine and Russia, which sort of represents 66% of import of wheat from that particular region, what then should the government do? Because if you look at wheat, we have bread, we have like the local products that come from wheat directly. And this is going to be a huge blow, not just to the Kenyan government, but to the region.
Correct.
So what are the options available for importers and the government?
I think, Vincent, I want to take you back. There's a time that we were producing a lot of wheat. That is in the region of Narok, Transmara region, and I think we were able to supply up to 40% of what we consumed locally, and therefore we only are required to maybe import 60% thereabout. But that production has gone down over time. I don't know why, but I would want to tie it to what has been happening in the agricultural space for some time. The government has not paid keen attention to our agricultural sector. That is notwithstanding the fact that agriculture is one of our biggest the biggest contributors to our economy. But that notwithstanding, Vincent, geopolitics as it were currently, the biggest producers of wheat is Russia and of course Ukraine and the Baltic countries, but the biggest are those two countries. With what is happening in that region, we expect that supply to go down almost immediately and by a very big margin. So the government should start looking at the other possible supply regions, start negotiating with them, rather than wait until we don't have supplies and then we start running around to be able to secure these supplies. I want to reference you to what the US did with oil. When they imposed sanctions on Russia, on the Russian oil, they went to Venezuela and started negotiating with them if they can up their production and supply to the US. Those are some of the things that as government they should start thinking around. That now that this is a situation that we are in, what are the alternatives and how can we be proactive to be able to get this supply so that we don't have interruptions into that supply chain. Otherwise, if you leave it open, then you might wake up one day and factories tell you that we don't have supplies, we don't have wheat supplies, and therefore we cannot produce this particular product into the market.
Well, there is a section that is calling for policy change towards GMOs, genetically modified products, where despite the fact that Kenya does not allow for GMO wheat to be imported in the country, should there be a change towards that particular policy?
I'm not a proponent of GMOs for a long time, and this one will allow me to be subjective.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm not a big proponent of GMOs because, as Africa, I think we still have very huge arable land that we can utilize if policies were set up right and we're able to utilize our resources to the optimally and to the maximum. So I think, personally, what the government should start doing is to go back to what we were doing in the 90s and early 2000s. How are we able to produce wheat then, and why can't we go back there? I believe things like wheat, things like rice, those are not things we should import, given that we brag ourselves as an agricultural economy. How do you say that you are an agricultural economy, yet you still import rice into the economy? You still import wheat into the economy, still import sugar into the economy. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think the government needs to go back to the drawing board and see how can they prop up the agricultural sector and produce what we need locally, and even export, Vincent.
Okay. Now, while still maintaining on the matters agriculture, let us look at some of the tweets that you guys are putting out there on different social media platforms. And we're looking at Twitter at Caleb Karuga says, one way you can reduce food prices is by first reducing the cost of production. Farm inputs have more than doubled over the last 5 years, yet cost of food remains largely unchanged. Reduced cost of production in the manufacturing and agriculture sectors, see cost of living going down. These are the same sentiments.
Agree with your viewer, 100%. Cost of production goes into what eventually the manufacturer is able to sell you goods in the market. So if you're able to reduce our cost of production, then you'll see that reflecting into the cost that we pay for some of these products in the market. So I agree with that view. Yes.
Okay. Now, residents of Murang'a County were calling for the subsidies of gas. And cooking gas is one of the, let's say, major ingredients that most of Kenyans are using to cook. Is this one way to look at it? Because if you look at oil, and if you look at fuel, what the government did with fuel subsidy, should it be done to the gas as well?
I know gas is a tricky area, especially with the current geopolitical environment. So that we might wish that the government gives us subsidies on that, but they might not be able to. But that notwithstanding, there are several areas that the government can give subsidies that will cushion consumers from the high cost of living. Like for example, in farm inputs, what we're able to subsidize farm inputs, then cost of agricultural produce will go down. If they were able to work on cost of energy, that is electricity, then we see cost of production going down, eventually cost of manufactured goods going down. So there are several areas that the government can intervene to be able to reduce our CPI without necessarily going into what we call the areas we cannot touch. Oil and gas, maybe that is a tall order for them now, given what is happening in the market. See, if you go into the market and you're competing with the US and the EU, you might not have a lot of leverage in that space, but there are spaces that we can control locally, and that is what I would urge the government to look into. Okay.
Some of the spaces that the government can touch is taxes, and let's look at another tweet at SEWS_, he or she says, we keep bashing KRA here, but the truth is the KRA is restricted to do what Parliament tells it to do. Everything related to taxes in Kenya is defined and written by Parliament. Food high prices, ask your mbunge. Electricity high, stone your MP, which I really don't call for that. Fuel cost, talk to your MP. And at Antonymic says, KRA is not an innocent bystander. The planning department and KRA formulates tax policies, and sometimes Parliament had to stop some crazy proposals, though I agree with you on the stoning of MPs since they decided to become an extension of the executive. Now,
let me make a comment there, Vincent. Kenyans have been bashing KRA for quite a long time. If you saw the case of Karachi Breweries versus the taxman versus KRA,
yes.
Kenyans thought that KRA is on the wrong, Karachi is on the right. Remember, KRA is like the policemen. They are implementers of policy. They are not the formulators. So essentially, then they have been told that this is what you're supposed to do. These are the tools. Go to the field and do it. So then they are doing what they're supposed to. do. The buck stops with Parliament and the executive. That is where the buck stops. Because if Parliament today was to pass that they have reduced the VAT from 16 to 8%, that would be the law, and that's what KRA would follow. So I think I agree with the view to the extent that the persons we should task with some of these things is the legislature and of course the executive. Of course I would not go for stoning, but I think what it means is let us know where the buck stops, and the buck stops with these people.
Well, looking at now Kenyan shillings, and it's struggling a lot, and if you look at what you suggested with the channeling in the dollar, what other areas can the government do to ensure that at least those who are doing businesses beyond the Kenyan borders do not get affected as much?
You see, our money market is a liberal market, meaning the forces of demand and supply play a lot in determining the price of the dollar vis-a-vis the Kenyan shilling. So what essentially it means that over the last 2 quarters, there's been a lot of demand for the dollar that maybe surpasses supply. That is, if you look at our supply comes from our exports, and of course the demand comes from people who want to import. So that means that our import demand is higher than our exports, and that now spirals into the rate that we trade Kenyan shillings with vis-a-vis the dollar. If you're to stabilize this, then you must manage your export vis-a-vis your imports, and you only do that. You see, for Kenya, we don't have a lot of exports, and we rely on what we call foreign direct investments. That is one. We rely on foreign remittances from Kenyans living abroad, and of course exports from tea and coffee, and service exports. Remember, currently we have an upcoming huge export space, that is service. You see, most of our banks have gone outside the country, and that is an export to us because they earn their revenues in dollars. So what the government can do is try and push more of service exports. Kenya is well endowed with a vibrant population, very well educated population that we can leverage on to be able to push our services outside there. You might not necessarily want to export your services to EU or to the US. Let us work with the African continent first and see what can we sell to our neighbors in terms of service, in terms of goods. That will give us a lot of dollar inflows into the country, and then provide a conducive environment that can attract FDIs, foreign direct investments. Over the last 2 years, Vincent, most FDIs or most foreign companies have pulled out of our market because of our unfavorable policies in terms of taxation, in terms of cost of energy, to other more friendlier countries. And in fact, initially they were going to Ethiopia, though Ethiopia also has had its issues. So if we can have a more friendly environment that attracts these foreign investors, you'll find a lot of dollar inflows into the economy. And when we have those dollar inflows into the economy, the cost of the shilling will go up. Our exchange rates will stabilize almost immediately.
Okay. Now, another school of thought is also blaming the current elections that is going where politicians are keeping money wherever they're keeping money for the campaigns. Is the election also going to interfere with the amount of money that I am going to use to buy bread as a Kenyan?
Of course, Vincent, our elections have not been managed very well. Of course, over the last 3 or 4 election cycles, we've had challenges with our elections, and investors are very sensitive. I had a joke that money fears noise. I don't know if it is, but I want to think it is true. That where there is noise, you'll most likely not attract foreign investors. Only if you're not able to attract them, then you're not able to get dollars into the economy. So it is a fact that we must improve on how we manage our elections. I would want to see a situation where Kenya has elections. It comes and goes without even you noticing. You just go to on the polling booth, you poll and you walk out, and then announce the results, and things move on. If we can reach there, then I can tell you, then we will have more confident investors in the economy that would not even worry if we are having elections or not. But as it is today, Vincent, I can bet you that most investors are not bringing in money, and they are not bringing any dollars into the economy. And the few who are there are pulling out just to watch this space and maybe come back maybe 3-4 months after our election cycle.
Okay, now one thing that the banking sector is coming into play, and with the risk-based model of giving loans. And if you look at our SMEs that contribute largely to the Kenyan economy, they've faced financial challenges. And then here comes the risk-based financing. Is this going to push this particular sector?
We discussed that with the Elijah in the morning, and my opinion was that risk-based lending is the way to go. You see, in a liberal market like ours, you cannot price the same product across. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that. I'll give you an example. If you are to go and buy a suit in upmarket, say in is it Moy Avenue, and the same suit you want to go and buy it down at River Road, the prices will be quite different. The reason is those markets are segmented. So if I wanted to get the same product but at a cheaper rate, then I'll be forced to go to River Road, of course, with the inconveniences that it gives me. But if I want the luxury of not going down there, then I must be ready to spend more on the upper side of the market. What if I relate that to our banking industry? If two clients went to KCB today to borrow, say Safaricom went to KCB, and myself as usual went to borrow. Let's say you want to borrow the same amount. KCB would be willing to lend. If you were to borrow the same rate, KCB would be willing to lend to Safaricom and not lend me at all. True. Because my risk profile is higher than Safaricom. They think, or they foresee Safaricom as paying back their money on time and even borrowing another round, other than me, who maybe I'll struggle with payment here. And I'm not saying that I'm a bad borrower. I'm just giving an example, who might struggle in paying our loan. So in that analogy then, myself represent an SME, will Safaricom represent the more structured corporates. So if you are to price that product at the same rate, then you'll find the banker will not be able to lend to the SME. They would rather lend either to the blue chip companies and the government. And what that means is that there's credit squeeze in the private sector. And remember, the biggest contributors in the economy is the private sector, not government, and not the blue chip companies. You can name them on your hand. But the bigger percentage, they say 80% of our economy is driven by SMEs. And therefore, if you're in government, that is the space that you want to focus on. So to me, I think risk-based lending gives a level playing field for all players, so that as an SME I can walk into the bank, even if I get my loan at 16-17%, but I'll get it. And also if Safaricom was to walk in, they can get the loan at say 11-12%, and even government can walk and get the loan at 9-10%. So the government has a leverage to be able to meet my needs at the same time meet the government's need. But if it was priced at the same level, which has been the case with the credit, the interest rate capping, then it deprives the private sector of the much needed capital to be able to fund the operations. Okay, now as we wind up, just a few words. Are Kenyans going to feel the pinch more, or you foresee a situation where we'll spend less? I've been listening to government of late, and I think government is on what we call an autopilot currently, meaning there's very limited input into the economy. I think everybody in government is now focused on the elections, the president included. So I foresee a situation where we might have this high cost of living for the next 6-7 months before things start stabilizing. Maybe if we have a successful and peaceful election, then things might stabilize maybe 1, 2, or 3 months after the election. But between now and the next and August 9th, things are likely to be the way they are, or the cost of living might go even slightly higher. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Well, that is George Munga saying in the next 7 months, brace yourselves as Kenyans. Now we take a short break, and when we return, we'll have John Makali, who will be talking a little bit on the sporting activities that happened during the weekend. Don't go away.